A long time ago, I did a video here on Geekdom 101 called Fusions Explained, part of the Dragon Ball In-Depth series, but since then, I began the technique guide, and I decided to do an updated version of that video, except this time with a lot more detail and a lot more information than we had 6-7 years ago. Firstly, I did already cover Namekian Fusion / assimilation in a previous technique guide because I wanted to split them all up into different videos. So this video today, part of the technique guide, will be covering Metamoran finger fusion. That's right, the traditional finger pose fusion done with the fusion pose that Gotenks and Gogeta were birthed from. There's a lot of information in this one, so let's get to it right now in the latest technique guide. The concept behind characters fusing together is not a Toriyama idea. It's been rooted in Japanese entertainment for decades. There were mecha anime and manga where the mechs would combine to form a bigger, stronger mech. Same thing with the monsters. And this bled into the live-action Japanese shows known as tokusatsu, where we saw all of this type of stuff play out week after week, and even year after year. The inspiration for this is clear even in Dragon Ball itself before the Z portion of the story. Who could forget the Pilaf Robo? Pilaf, Shu, and Mai's 3 battle robots fused together to create a bigger one to battle it out with Goku. The first time one of the good guys fused was Piccolo and Nail doing the Namekian assimilation, but I've done that video already, so remember to check it out. I'll leave a link to it in the card in the upper right. I want to focus strictly on Metamoran Fusion, aka Finger Fusion, because there's a lot to cover in this technique guide. According to Toriyama himself, the man behind this idea, or at least the man who gave it to Toriyama, was fellow manga artist and writer Masakatsu Katsuda. Before these two would work together in 2008 on a special collaboration for Jump Magazine, these two guys have been friends for decades. And in the early 1980s, they were introduced to each other from having the same editor, which would be Kazuhiko Torishima, who we've talked about before many times as being somebody who's been very influential in Dragon Ball and in other manga and even video games. Toriyama and Katsuda also seem to have the same kind of sense of humor. What do I mean by that? Well, Toriyama credits Katsuda with coming up with the idea to have two characters fuse together in Dragon Ball, leading to the fusion technique. However, when asked, Katsuda says it's only a rumor, and he did in fact suggest it to him, but he knows that Toriyama was not listening and claims that Toriyama later on thought it up on his own. So that's wacky. But either way, no matter which story you choose to believe, the idea for fusion is not native to Dragon Ball. Even in Journey to the West, which Toriyama took inspiration from for Dragon Ball, the only types of fusion you see there are demons fusing together, merging together that is, but it's not quite like this. Toriyama, when he began the Buu saga, needed to come up with a way to make characters combine while facing off against an opponent that was so powerful they could not beat them one-on-one, and that would lead to him coming up with the fusion pose and the Metamoran Fusion. Now let's talk about the lore. The first time that Goku ever mentions the term fusion was after the battle with Majin Vegeta and Vegeta's sacrifice. When everything calms down and they go up to the sacred temple, Goku mentions the only chance they might have of beating Majin Buu is by using the fusion technique. At this point, nobody had even heard of this thing who was on Earth. So while nobody on Earth knew the Metamoran Fusion, Dende, who is from planet Namek, somehow he knew of it. Maybe from the Namekian Book of Legends or from an elder, but somehow he knew, according to the manga. And that's because the technique was not developed on Earth, and thus nobody had ever seen it on Earth. This technique was developed by the people of planet Metamor, and Goku met some dead members of that race, the Metamorans, while in the other world after the end of the Cell Saga but before the Buu Saga during the 7-year time skip. Goku accomplished quite a bit during this time. Besides just learning the fusion pose, he also mastered SS3 and became a much better fighter. So we don't actually see the Metamoran people or Goku learning this at any point in the manga. Goku just explains it, but we don't even know much about them except for something I'm going to bring up here shortly. So stay tuned for that. But there's just not much there. And I think a lot of people get the Metamorans confused with the Yard Rats. I've seen people say that Goku learned fusion from the Yard Rats, and that's not true. He learned instantaneous movement from them, but he learned the fusion from the Metamorans, and both were learned off screen. So that's why it gets confusing. But bottom line is they invented the move, and Goku picked up on it in the other world and was determined to teach Goten and Trunks because they had the most potential at the time, because they all thought that Gohan was dead, if you go back and remember, and thus Goten and Trunks were kind of like their last hope. Of course, later on we find out that he just wanted to give them something to do. But either way, the fusion pose became a very useful tool, not just for Goten and Trunks, but later on Goku and Vegeta. But we'll get to that here shortly. So if we go right to Daizenshuu, the guidebook, it states the following about fusion. It is an art where two humans can merge together only if their power and body size are very close. And through merging, the two users give birth to a separate person who possesses power and techniques far surpassing what they had on their own. When merging, the two users must perform the fusion pose symmetrically. This pose is very embarrassing for two adults to perform. Toriyama himself talks about how he purposely made this form look goofy to add some comic relief to the series. This version of fusion can only be achieved by performing the fusion pose correctly, and at one point we see Goku and Piccolo embarrassingly showing it off to Goten and Trunks so that they can learn how to do it. But within the original 42 volumes of the manga, not including movies or anything after the original core Toriyama work from the 80s and 90s, the only characters to successfully perform the Metamoran Fusion in the series that we saw was Goten and Trunks. If we go back to Daizenshuu 4, page 116, it reads the following. In the story, Trunks and Goten perform this fusion, but they fail 2 times because their pose is slightly wrong. When they fail at this technique, it greatly changes the body type of the resulting person, making them fat or thin, and rather than strengthening the two users, it makes them weaker. The name after merging becomes a combination of the two users' respective names, and in Trunks and Goten's case, they ended up as Gotenks. Furthermore, after merging, their clothes are those of the citizens of planet Metamor. So, if you've ever wondered why they have that cool vest and the baggy pants when they fuse, it's because those are the clothing of the people of Metamor. Which I've always thought looked very cool, but it never made sense to how a technique can change your clothes like that. Let's just say it's magic, because really it is magic. Now, we see Goten and Trunks performing the fusion wrong and creating fat Gotenks and skinny Gotenks. So the two users have to be somewhat similar in size and similar in power. At one point while Goku is training Goten and Trunks, he orders Trunks to lower his ki to match up with Goten's. So if you have two characters and one is stronger than the other, he would have to lower his energy level to match up with his partner, relatively speaking, in order for the fusion to work properly. Now, one of the big debates is the power of fusion. That's been a huge debate for many years because I feel like so many people in the fandom either overrate or underrate fusion. Not everyone, just most people. And I think even the guidebooks might have it wrong. Yes, I'm saying it right now, I don't agree with the guidebooks because in the guidebooks, and I forget which one it actually states this in, they say that the fusion is a multiplication of user 1 and user 2's power. But I don't believe that's the case. And if that was the original intended idea, it's definitely been changed throughout the years, especially with Dragon Ball Super Broly, because Gogeta himself says something different. It could be a multiplication of power, but there's obviously an extra boost with being fused. And if you go back to the original explanation in the guidebook, it says that they become a separate person. So Gotenks, although it is a combination of Goten and Trunks, and they have similar memories, it's a separate person. And that's why Gotenks was able to achieve Super Saiyan 3, while Goten and Trunks don't know how to do it on their own. You would think that if they did it fused, they could figure out how to do it individually, but that's not the case. For some reason, Gotenks can do Super Saiyan 3. And there's a couple reasons as to why that is. Number one, the power base of a fused character is much higher than that of an individual. So you're going to have a boost in power no matter what if you do the fusion right. And number two, Gotenks has a different mind than Goten and Trunks, and thus is a smarter fighter. When you fuse, the fused character ends up gaining a form of intellect that the individuals don't have. And same thing goes with knowledge. Now, why this happens, there's no explanation. But Gotenks turns SS3 in the original manga. Now, in the anime version of Dragon Ball Z, there's a scene where Goku demonstrates Super Saiyan 3 in front of Trunks and Goten, and that could lead to Gotenks remembering that, and thus being able to tap into it with a higher power level. But it's never explicitly explained. That's my best guess. But Goten and Trunks were not the only ones to use the fusion pose. When we go to anime-only events, aka the movies, Goku and Vegeta used it in Dragon Ball Z Movie 12, known in Japan as the Revival of Fusion, Goku and Vegeta, known in the West as Fusion Reborn. According to the guidebook, it states here that Vegeta hated the idea of performing fusion with his rival Goku, but cornered by the evil enemy Janemba, he ends up reluctantly performing fusion with Goku. However, they fail once, and that's what leads to Veku. That's from Daizenshuu 6, page 142. And then Veku, of course, loses. They try again. And the second time, after the time limit runs out, they are able to successfully create Gogeta, and thus they completely annihilate Janemba. Later on, in Dragon Ball GT, we saw Gogeta one more time as a Super Saiyan 4, and I've got a whole video on how strong that Gogeta was, because he was insanely powerful. But we would not see them fuse again, Goku and Vegeta that is, until the Dragon Ball Renaissance and the era of Dragon Ball Super, where in the movie Dragon Ball Super Broly, Goku teaches Vegeta the fusion pose, and he learns it, and they fail twice, but they're finally able to achieve the power of Gogeta. We see Gogeta in his base form for the first time in any official anime or manga material, and we later see that he can not only achieve the regular golden-haired Super Saiyan, but he can also do Super Saiyan Blue. So Gogeta Blue versus Broly is the main event fight of that film, and we saw how powerful Gogeta was in that movie because, man, he gave Broly a pummeling that Goku nor Vegeta could even hope to achieve. So the power of fusion can be debated, but there's no question it's extremely high. Goten and Trunks would have been smashed by Majin Buu had they not been able to fuse. It would have been maybe a one-hit kill, but the fusion saved them. When it comes to Broly, Goku and Vegeta could have probably taken a few of his attacks, and they did, but beating him the way they did was probably not going to happen unless Goku was able to tap into Ultra Instinct. And if you remember, that was a time when Goku did not know how to activate it by will. So because of that, they were stuck with fusing, but it worked out for them. Now, we've got to talk about the controversial time limit issue here. So, in the original manga, we were told that a fusion only lasts 30 minutes. That's how it works. That's the drawback of fusing. You have this great and powerful character, but there's a time limit, and there's also another drawback. When a character is really powerful, the character using higher amounts of energy can lower that 30 minutes all the way down to even 5 minutes. Using a high level of ki shortens the time. And once the time limit runs out, or when you use too much power, you defuse back into being two different people. If we're being blunt here, Toriyama obviously uses this idea to get out of a character finishing another character off with fusion. He wants to extend or prolong the story to add an air of a dramatic element or unpredictability, even though I do feel like they've sort of overused it a bit, maybe with other forms and things like that. There's a reason as to why Toriyama put that in there. You know, with great power comes a limited time. Sorry, Uncle Ben, but it's different for Dragon Ball. So, interestingly enough, this rule has been broken a few times, and it's kind of annoying when it is. For example, The 2008 Jump Super Anime Tour special, known as Yo Son Goku and His Friends Return, featured Goten and Trunks fusing, but they somehow defused immediately after accidentally fusing into Fat Gotenks. You're supposed to stay in the fat form for 30 minutes, and you could blame like movie timing for why Gogeta was fat for a shorter time in the Fusion Reborn film, and in Dragon Ball GT, Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta only lasted 10 minutes because it was way too much power, but this doesn't make any sense. And the same thing happened in the Resurrection F arc, the TV version in Dragon Ball Super. The Toei writers, this was not Toriyama's writing, it was the Toei writers, some genius in that boardroom decided to put Gotenks in this arc. The problem is that they once again forgot about the time limit. Now, the time limit is not the only way that a fusion can be disrupted and people can be defused. If we go to Dragon Ball Z Movie 13, featuring the giant kaiju Hirudegarn, Goten and Trunks create Gotenks and go right to Super Saiyan 3, and he knocks them away and they unfuse immediately. So that means that Hirudegarn is incredibly strong, and also it means the writers wanted to have Gotenks in the movie just to get smashed to make Goku look better. Don't even get me started on that, because that's wild. So in the manga it all kind of made sense, but when you get to the anime filler and the movies, that's when Toei kind of took liberties with that time limit and with, the power of fusion. They never explained if fused characters can like manually defuse themselves, like what Gotenks did in that 2008 special. And that would be a very simple explanation as to why this went on, but we never got that. So as of right now, it's just a contradiction. And remember, we were told originally that after somebody defuses, that they cannot refuse for another hour. So that has been broken who knows how many times, but that's what we were originally told. Now, the manga never really contradicts this. It's only in the supplemental stuff like the anime and the movies when you see stuff like this. But regardless of these problems, fusion has become iconic with this franchise. Not just the fusion pose itself, but characters like Gogeta are immensely popular. I mean, Gogeta in Dragon Ball Super Broly was a big part as to why that movie sold so well, because it was the first time we saw Toriyama writing Gogeta into the series, and not just as a hypothetical character we only saw in GT and in one movie. And we may see him again at some point in the future. Time will tell. Now, when it comes to the creation of Gogeta, Toriyama was one of many people involved in the creation, but we don't know how much involvement Toriyama had with the creation of Gogeta, because back in those days, Toriyama would work with Tadayoshi Yamamuro to create the movie characters, but we do know that Toriyama claims that his first drawing of Gogeta was the one you see on your screen right now from the Dragon Box the movies. That doesn't mean that he drew Gogeta then, though. It could be an old sketch he had from the 90s that he gave to Toei. But this, according to what he said, was the first ever image of Gogeta, so it could be that this is what he designed for movie 12, and then Yamamuro may have just adapted it to the anime. There's still a lot of mystery behind that one. Fusion began in Dragon Ball manga chapter 469, but has continued onward to become a huge hit with the fans of this franchise. In the video games, we saw some exclusive fusions too. And I don't just mean Dragon Ball Fusions, the game. I mean, like, for example, we saw a hypothetical Goku and Mr. Satan fusion in the manga, which was very funny. We saw a bunch of other characters fuse in other video games, like, for example, Tenshinhan and Yamcha fuse in one of the games, Budokai 2 that is. We also see Piccolo and Dr. Mashirito fusing in Jump Superstars, which is rare because we have a non-Dragon Ball character, Mashirito being from Dr. Slump, fusing with Piccolo, and that was cool. And there's tons of others. I mean, tons. Same thing with what we see in Dragon Ball Heroes with Gohan and Trunks fusing as well. Fusion is a big part of this franchise and will live on forever because people want to see more fusions, whether it be villains or whether it be good guys. That is something that is just synonymous with Dragon Ball. And my next fusion-related technique guide will be about the Potara fusion. So we'll talk about the differences there between that and this and a whole lot more. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and I hope to catch you soon.